Hello, my name is Jean-Jacques Nantel. Maybe you know the story of the two mice who had fallen in a bowl of cream and who were swimming to avoid drowning. After a couple of hours, the first mouse thought, "It's pointless to keep fighting because I will drown anyway." She stopped fighting and she drowned, while her friend kept swimming until the cream turned into butter. She then climbed on top of the butter and jumped out of the bowl. When you face a mortal danger, it's always useful to fight. Nowadays, even if everybody knows the planet is dying, almost nothing is being done to solve the problem. Some believe that buying electric cars or solar panels would do the trick, when it is obvious that much more than that would be necessary from each of us only to stabilize the situation. To calm their anxiety, others joke about our inevitable economic and demographic collapse by saying that when mankind will have destroyed everything, rats and cockroaches will inherit the planet. And after saying that, they try to reassure themselves by saying that scientists are working hard to find quick and easy solutions to our environmental problems. In fact, they don't, because very little money is being spent on it. We still don't have the technology and the millions of dollars which would be necessary to keep alive artificially every single human being. We are 7.5 billion people and counting, and very soon our global ecological impact could be multiplied by 10 times or more if all the poor of the world succeed in becoming as rich as the average Westerner. To give you an idea of the problem, in 2016, the per capita GDP of the USA was 21 times higher than in Africa. Our politicians, who are as overwhelmed as you can be by the environmental mess we created, try to hide their incompetence by lying. Most modern governments keep publishing false statistics on the debt burden or the unemployment rate of their country. Petroleum-rich countries lie on their real oil reserves. The Chinese leaders lie on everything to conceal their extreme economic and environmental problems. Religious leaders keep lying on the real meaning of their holy books, etc. As I explained in the first two videos of this series, the economic and environment and demographic collapse I'm talking about is inevitable for many reasons. First, because it is much easier to destroy than to build in this universe. For instance, scientists can very easily quadruple the destructive power of our nuclear arsenals, but they are unable to quadruple our global food production. Second, that collapse is inevitable because of some of our natural limitations. For example, our prehistoric brain, which did not evolve during the last 10,000 years, is totally unable to understand the explosive nature of a phenomenon like an exponential growth. We can't comprehend that the phenomenon, which has been doubling in size every 20 years for centuries, could destroy the planet in a matter of years. Our brain is too slow to deal with the fantastic acceleration of history created by the exponential growth of our modern societies. To give you a striking example of that, we all know the economic importance of Wall Street. That stock exchange, the largest in the world, is supposed to give us information about the health of the global economy. Unfortunately, there are reasons to believe that the information provided by this all-important financial thermometer is no longer reliable. One of the reasons is that at the beginning of the 21st century, 50% of the transactions on Wall Street are made by supercomputers who can buy and sell millions of actions per second. And this is without any human intervention and without taking into account the signals sent by the financial authorities. Computers don't listen to people. The system is so out of control that on May the 6th, 2010, at 2:45 in the afternoon, the Dow Jones Index on Wall Street lost 9% of its values in a matter of minutes before quickly recovering. Even today, those who created the program of the Wall Street supercomputers don't fully understand what really happened that day. It's scary. Another important human limitation is the fact that as soon as they become rich, humans start wasting resources to impress their neighbors. As you can verify with the bibliography I will put at the end of this video, in 2012, the United Nations reported that for the first time in history, there were more obese and overweight people in the world than people suffering from hunger. Most people assume that a morbidly obese person has very big internal organs. It's false. When you dissect their dead body, you find at the center of it a normal body surrounded by enormous balloons of fat. In a world where famines have almost disappeared, such an accumulation of fat is not only useless but detrimental. Some obese don't do anything else but eating and digesting. Many cannot walk or wash themselves, and some risk suffocating under their own body weight. Nowadays, such an enormous waste of useful resources can be found all over the world and not only for food. At the beginning of the 21st century, hundreds of millions of consumers throw away cars, furniture, or clothes in perfectly good condition. To impress their friends, the nouveau riche buy extremely flashy mansions, and billionaires steal all the money they can to buy yachts and castles which are larger than those owned by other billionaires. There is simply no limit to our wasting capacity. Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, once proved it by drinking a very expensive pearl dissolved in vinegar. If modern humans can waste that much useful resources and can produce that much trash, it's because they use the extremely concentrated energy we find in coal, gas, and petroleum. Almost everything we consume today has been produced with enormous quantity of fossil fuels. Without fossil fuels, our food industry wouldn't have the fertilizers and the pesticides it uses, and it could not power the farm equipment, the delivery truck, or the processing and packing machines of its factories. Our pollution problem is not really caused by petroleum. It comes from the Industrial Revolution itself, which has been responsible during 2 centuries for the exponential growth of our economies and our populations on a planet with very limited resources. This is what kills the planet, not the oil. By the way, it's not true that human beings will end up consuming the very last drop of petroleum on the planet. The economic law of supply and demand makes it impossible. Why? Because if the oil was to become rare or difficult to extract, its price would increase so much that most consumers would start using other forms of energy. Only the cheapest and the most accessible oil is about to disappear. When I was studying geology, My teachers used to say that all over the world, the rapid depletion of the traditional mineral deposits would soon force us to exploit the minerals which are disseminated in the source rocks. A source rock is a rock formation which is so young that nature didn't have time to concentrate the minerals it contains. Exploiting the source rocks is precisely what the North American oil companies are doing when they extract petroleum from the American oil shales or from the Canadian tar sands. Unfortunately, such an extraction destroys so many land and so many aquifers that within decades, a significant portion of the breadbasket we call Alberta will have been transformed in a desert. It is important to understand that the Hubbard peak theory we explained in the first video of this series to predict the end of the cheap oil is also valid for any other natural resource. In other words, even if we were to find a substitute to petroleum, the growth of our industrial societies would nevertheless be stopped by the depletion of another rare but essential resource. In Australia, in California, and in the Middle East, the lack of water is what impedes the further development of industries and of cities. In India, the lack of arable land already limits the development of many industries. In Siberia, in Alaska, and in northern Canada, climate is the main limiting factor, etc. The fact of the matter is that our industrial enterprises are pure parasites of the natural environments. They pollute, but they don't bring anything positive to the plants and animals which constitute the natural world. As a result, our modern industrial societies only care about the profitable part of their industrial processes. This is the reason why our modern cities have a very geometric nature. Our buildings and our houses are rectangular. Our assembly lines, our streets, our roads are as linear and as flat as possible, etc. Why is it like that? Because it's more efficient and profitable. In nature, where everything influences everything, you rarely see straight lines like that. Almost everything is curvy. Economically speaking, most of our factories, modern factories, are not and have never been profitable. And it has been like that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. If their balance sheets say they are profitable, it's because their owners don't pay a lot of the costs related to their economic activity. For everything which is not related to the profitable transformation of raw materials into sellable products, entrepreneurs try to transfer their costs to somebody else. For them, taxpayers must pay the roads and all the other infrastructure they use. The population must raise and educate the workers they need. Governments must take care of the workers which have been injured in their factories. And of course, pollution is something future generations will have to take care of. The pollution they produce would not be that problematic if it was made of something as inert as sand or gravel. But this is not the case. Most factories, modern factories, throw in the environments products which are so toxic that they tend to kill the surrounding plants and animals. The industrial pollutants are also a problem because we don't really know their combined effects on the environment. If biologists can easily predict what lead, for example, can do to a specific organ, they are totally unable to predict the combined effects of the thousands of different chemical products mankind throws each year in the environment by billions of tons. For centuries, our industrialists have used different techniques to hide their pollution. They kept building higher chimneys to spread it on much larger surfaces. They dumped their most dangerous chemicals in the oceans, or they moved their dirtiest factories in less polluted countries. Dilution was then the solution. However, in the present century, those tricks no longer work for two main reasons. First, because almost all countries on the planet are now heavily industrialized and polluted. And second, because some natural processes tend to reconcentrate the pollutants our industrialists worked so hard to disperse. Rain and gravity play a leading role here. When rain falls, it absorbs a lot of atmospheric pollutants before hitting the ground, where it dissolves solid pollutants. By passing from rivulets to creeks and rivers, those pollutants are naturally reconcentrated and end up at the bottom of valleys, on riverbeds, or in the aquifers where billions of people take their drinking water. That reconcentration of pollutants is even more important in the river deltas situated near the oceans, which means where most of our modern industrial cities have been built. In other words, industrial pollutants tend to flow back towards the cities which produced them in the first place. No wonder that a metropolis like New York doesn't take its drinking water from the Hudson River, which flows through it, but from the pristine Catskill Mountains situated 200 kilometers away. Today, our oceans are so polluted that there are large garbage patches inside the naturally rotating oceanic currents we called gyres. The ocean carries so much trash that the beaches of some of the most remote islands of the world are littered with plastic objects. Professional divers say that the same is true for most of the ocean floors. That accumulation of garbage in the middle of the oceans is a clear indication that the planet can no longer absorb all the pollution produced by the exponential growth of our industrial societies. As a result, humans themselves are exposed to an ever-increasing concentration of pollutants. In particular, all the plants we eat come from fields which are everywhere exposed to polluted rain. The problem is even greater for the meat we consume, since the concentration of pollutants increases rapidly when they move up the food chain. We are literally eating our own garbage. All over the world, people can see with their own eyes the damages they inflict on the planet. Fishermen know that overfishing will soon destroy their industry and their jobs. They know that 70 to 80% of the world fisheries are already overexploited. This is especially a problem for a poor country like Africa, where the per capita fish consumption is projected to decrease in the coming 20 years, all that on a continent where the population keep burning the forest which produce the very bushmeat they eat. In newly industrialized countries like China or India, it is obvious that entrepreneurs are encouraged by the governments to build their factories near the farmland those countries use to feed their billions of citizens. On every continent, the competition between cities, factories and farmers for the last available water reserves is so intense that 21 of the 37 most important aquifers of the world are being depleted. In the developed world, the bee colonies farmers use to pollinate 1/3 of the plants we eat have been collapsing for the last 10 years, probably due to chemical poisoning. In many countries, fires burn uselessly in old abandoned coal mines because nobody knows how to extinguish them, etc. As we all know, every time our industrial output increases, our natural environments suffer an additional decrease, which means that an ever-decreasing world environment has to absorb an ever-increasing quantity of pollutants. Both phenomena influence each other. They multiply their effects to make the planet less and less habitable. Let me show you how dangerous and urgent the situation is. In 2016, the world economy grew at the annual rate of 2.4%. Normally it's much faster. Let's assume, for the sake of demonstration, that the global absorption capacity of the planet declines at only half that rate, which is 1.2%. Let's take 2017 as a reference year. With a stable 2.4% annual growth rate, the world economy would double in size by 2047, while the loss of the environmental absorption capacity of the planet would be multiplied by only 1.43. By multiplying both numbers, we find that the global environmental damage produced by our industrial activity would be 2.9 times larger than today. By 2077, only 60 years from now, our global economy would be 4.15 times larger, while the loss of the global environmental absorption capacity would be 2.05 larger. The global environmental damage would then be 8.5 times larger than today. Now, if we take a 4.8 annual growth rate for the economy, the global environmental damage on the planet would be multiplied by 8 in 2047 and by 69 by 2077. And with a 6% annual growth rate of the economy, China and India often do much better, the global environmental damage would be 14 times larger than today in 2047 and 194 times larger in 2077. You can choose the growth rates you want. You will always get some ridiculous results like that. As ridiculous as the serious predictions of our demographers who keep repeating that Africa, for example, will quadruple its population during the 21st century. If respected demographers can make such stupid prediction like that, it is because they are isolated in their own science and have not been trained to take into account the data coming from the other sciences. Modern economists, and especially the bankers, have the same problem. They did not upgrade their theories for decades, and as a consequence, they don't prepare themselves for the coming crisis, but for the crisis of 1929. Most of them have lost contact with the real world. For them, reality is what they see on their computer screens. No wonder they don't understand why they can no longer jumpstart the world economy by throwing trillions of dollars in it. Our politicians, most of them are lawyers, are even less adaptable. Very few can make a useful synthesis with all the available information. They don't even understand or believe that the decline of the world environment is what really blocks any further economic expansion. When the next crisis will hit, they will do like their predecessors. They will ask their central bank to print more money to pay for to pay their civil servants, or to finance the expensive public works they will judge necessary to restart the economy. Inevitably, the inflation created by all that money printing will reduce the purchasing power of the population, which will only worsen the situation. Of course, the coming crisis will not be a pure free fall into the abyss. There will be respites, but our economic and demographic decline will continue unabated until our industrial economies reach a level where the last remaining natural environments will be able to absorb all the pollution produced by mankind. In a cold and desolate universe, we are really destroying the only habitable planet we have. To have more cars, more food, more fashionable gadgets, to have more fun and comfort, we are knowingly destroying our natural habitat, our spaceship. After paying lip service to the environmental cause, almost all of us keep voting for politicians who promise to keep our industrial economies growing. We will not avoid the consequences of such a stupid and perfectly well-informed negligence. This being said, it is also perfectly obvious that the coming crisis will not be as severe all over the world. For those living in isolated regions with enough farmland, a lot of clean water, and many well-preserved natural environment, the people will experience a crisis similar to the Depression of the 1930s. It should be the case in the three Americas, for example. However, overpopulated countries like Bangladesh and Ethiopia, who already struggle to feed their citizens, they should experience a brutal loss of population. To summarize, I would say that, for example, Canada could experience a 50% unemployment rate, while Ethiopia would experience a 50% death rate. And don't make any mistake, very few people will be allowed to immigrate. First, the sheer size of the starving population will make it impossible. And second, history shows that when a global crisis begins, poverty and unemployment force all governments to close their border. Between 1929 and 1945, for example, immigration almost stopped in North America. Most probably, the poorest nations will be depopulated by wars, famines, and epidemics, those three closely related serial killers who exterminated billions of innocent people throughout history. It usually works like that. When a region is overpopulated and has a lot of unemployed and frustrated young men, a war breaks out for whatever reason. When that happens, farmers are forced to flee the war zone and stop producing food, which provokes a famine. Very soon, that famine weakens the immune system of the whole population and epidemics appear. And finally, epidemics kill en masse the poorest of the poor. This is usually how nature solves the overpopulation problem of a species. For all those who will live in remote and slightly richer regions of the world, that tragedy will look very much like the sinking of the Titanic. Because they will no longer have enough reserves to help the starving nations, those people will feel as helpless and guilty as the survivors who sat in the lifeboats of the Titanic to watch in total silence the desperate struggle for survival and the agony of their friends and family. In other words, The coming crisis will not destroy mankind. We are too smart, too many, and too widespread to disappear altogether. Anyway, in the last 4 billion years, our ancestors survived to much worse than that. This being said, when nature will have re-established its dominion over mankind, the survivors will be forced to pass through a new round of natural selections. Those who will fare better in such a highly competitive environment will be the youngest, the healthiest, the wisest, those who will have reserves, good connection, or something very useful to sell. Doctors, for example. Only those will thrive. They will be the fathers and the mothers of the future. As apocalyptic as this may seem, it is an inevitable outcome since nothing serious has been done or is being done on the rapidly dying planet. The party is over, my friend. Welcome to the real world. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, to recommend this video to your friends, and to give it the thumbs up. See you next time.